Hello, YouTube Sidekick here in my, to me, brand new KA-50. So why, you might wonder, am I making a video in an aircraft that I am quite obviously still learning? That's obvious from just watching the screen. Well, let me allay your fears, at least in one regard. I'm not here to give you advice on how to fly this aircraft. Really, I'm making this video as kind of from the other direction. I wanted to go out to the bombing range in an aircraft that I am clearly not proficient in, and talk a bit about why I spend so much time talking about and flying on bombing rangers, literally around the DCS world. And because, dear viewer, in case you hadn't figured it out, we are going out to the range today in the KA-50, the range near Caballetti, although it's got a couple of twists today. At any rate, I saw a post recently where somebody basically said that the bombing range that Eagle Dynamics provided in the Marianas map was all well and good, but since there was so much open space on the various DCS maps, they couldn't really see themselves ever using it. Which got me thinking. I mean, what is the point of using a bombing range to simulate attacking targets inside something that is already a simulation? Why do that? Why not just plunk down a target in your favorite spot and make a few runs on it? And to some extent, I think that's a valid point. I mean, like I said, the whole thing is a simulation. Why go to the trouble of setting up and flying to a simulated bombing range? And I thought about it, and I guess it comes down for me to, I guess, maybe my science and engineering background, maybe my personality as well. I mean, I am definitely a proponent of the principle of repetition is the mother of retention. You know, the more you repeat something consistently, the more likely you are to remember how to do it properly. And I guess, come to think of it, that probably comes from my military experience and maybe martial arts training as well. At any rate, for me, to improve a skill, I find it is very useful to try and repeat the task frequently and consistently, like where I'm able to keep as many of the parameters the same as possible and change just a few things, the things that I'm working on. I think it helps me to have at least some semi-quantitative measurement of the value of how things are working, so I can track to see, what's working and what's not. All of which is to say that I like coming out to a bombing range and using a consistent bombing range procedures like range patterns. And I like approaching the pattern this way because it means that all of the background procedures and processes become routine, so I can focus more on that part of the skill that I'm actually trying to learn. So I wanted to make this video about flying a completely new aircraft at a range to talk not so much about the right way to employ it, because I'm almost certainly getting that wrong, or at least kind of suboptimal. Instead, I wanted to show how, at least for me, doing this is a structured, repeatable way to help me learn a skill. So I set out to do some rocket runs on the range with the KA-50, and the first thing I discovered was that, well, I couldn't use the range, at least not easily the way it was configured, because the current range is kind of set in some clearings in the trees, which looks good at altitude, but doesn't work very well at this altitude, especially if you're trying to use the KA-50's long-range targeting capabilities. So I added a new section to the range, specifically for helicopter work. So I wanted to make a video to tell you about that as well. So the way that range is set up is it's set up in a clearing that has an opening that points in a particular direction, basically back towards where I am now. And so that means that if you come at it from this direction, you can do essentially what I'm doing here, which is coming up over this little ridge. It's a number of kilometers away from the target area. And if you can find the target area, which is what I'm looking for now, it's a little bit to the right there, I think. So if you can find the target area, then you essentially can sit back here over this ridge, do your reconnaissance, pick up a target, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to fly in more tactically towards the target, and then I'm going to try and do a little bit of a pop-up and dive on the target when I get a little bit closer, when I'm within range to use the rockets. At least that's the theory. And this is based on, like I said, it's just my own procedure that I've come up with based on seeing some videos about how other guys do it. Particularly Casmo's videos have been very helpful. I'm not sure it's the best way to use the KA-50 or the best way to attack with rockets, but it's a procedure that I can test on the range, and I can test it repeatably, and it helps me learn how to fly, and it helps me to learn how to use the weapon system. So I can do it repeatedly. I can do it the same way every time, and I can figure out what works and what doesn't. So you can see now that if you've been watching me fiddling around down there on the Schkal, I have managed to acquire a target, or at least get the laser on a target. And now we've started our run in. So now I'm going to try and stay low, but not so low that I lose lock on the target. And then I'm going to keep doing that until I get within a couple of kilometers, because I find that's about the effective range. Even with the S13s, the system doesn't really want me to use them much more than a couple kilometers away, which is interesting. Interesting and different than the way the system works in an aircraft like the Su-25T, but be that as it may. We're going to get within a couple of kilometers, then we're going to pop up and then try to attack the target a little bit more from an overhead angle. And see how it goes. Now, I will freely admit that I am not using all of the systems in the KA-50 to their best advantage, particularly a lot of the autopilot modes and that sort of thing. I'm quite happy to have comments on the video if you have some advice for how to use the system better. I'm not claiming to be an expert, I'm just trying to make it work. Okay, so here we are, we've gotten in close, now we're popping up, and I'm going a little bit to the side, but just so maybe I can see it out of the corner there. Well, that was too much because I lost lock, but there we're back. Okay, so now we got to try and dive in and get it lined up. Get it lined up. Get it lined up. We want those two circles to overlap, and then we're ready to fire. All right, there we go. Maybe a second batch, maybe a third one for good measure. And now it's time to get out of here. Well, that wasn't bad results. I think we actually hit the target with that. So there are definitely some room for improvement, both in the way that I handled the sensor system and also in the flying, in the approach. And clearly at the terminal end of the approach there was just a lot more all over the place than I would like to be. But I guess the point is now that I can fly back out there and try to run that same kind of approach again and keep as many things the same as possible. And so it gives me a chance to learn from my mistakes, try to get better, and also to be able to compare the results at the end. So I think that's the point of doing this in a range setting like this. I'm clearly not ready for prime time. And at least for me, the only way I'm going to get ready for prime time is that if I do this over and over again, but I do it in a consistent environment, in a consistent way, so I can learn to improve all of the little things that need to be improved. So anyways, we're going to fly back out here, and I'm going to practice trying to get good and low, treetop level if I can here. And that's part of the practice for me too, is it gives me a reason to go out and practice flying low level and something to do while I'm doing it rather than just flying around. So I find that helps a little as well. And it also helps that I'm having to try and navigate. There's a particular point that I want to get to so I can start the attack. And I do find that that's something that I was a little unprepared for. Switching to rotorcraft and flying at low level is that your situational awareness of where you are in the world, it's a lot easier to lose that at 50 feet off the ground than it is at 5,000 feet. So that's a necessary skill that I'm having to practice as well. So all of this gives me a chance to just practice flying the KA-50 and learn the things I need to learn. And I've been practicing on this range setup now a few times. This isn't my first run through it to record the video, so I'm getting better at it, but I'm still recognizing in classic fashion, the more I learn, the more I realize that I have to learn, but that's okay. That's partly why we do this, right? So here we're coming back, getting close to back to the ridge where we started. So now the exercise here is coming around again and doing I'm trying to do a reasonably smooth deceleration without popping up too high. Turn back towards the target and come in at it at a slightly slower speed so we have time to pick up the target and acquire the next target, and then we'll speed up and do another tactical run in. So here we are over the ridge. Not bad deceleration, maybe a little higher than I wanted to be, maybe a little faster than I wanted to be, but we're turning back in towards the target. And now it's just a matter of getting on the, getting the aircraft stabilized so I can get on the sensor again and find myself another target. Just get the autopilot set there. Now I need to get the weapons active, get the Shkval down and looking. I'm looking for a new target. Okay, there's the target. Okay, there's the next target. It's a bunker. Let's just get on it. I don't think it's going to acquire it at this range, but I can at least get it tracking it. And once again, now we're going to start speeding up and going into our more tactical approach here. And so the trick, as it was the last time, is to stay high enough to be able to see the target, but no higher than absolutely necessary. So we're doing more of a tactical approach, and also stay out of the way of those high-tension power lines, which I have had an unfortunate interaction with in the past on these runs, I will tell you. And I also need to keep an eye on the Shkval, because it looks like I'm getting a tree that might come in the way. I need to make sure we don't let that obscure the target. So, I figure I could do this as I get more experience. I can actually be a little bit more evasive, probably get a little bit lower, not flying so much in a straight line. I'd be interested again to know from the tactical helicopter community if this is even a viable way of engaging a target like this. It's certainly fun to fly this low and try to stay accurate. Pick your spots, look for ways to fly between the trees instead of over them, that kind of thing. Okay, so as before, we're coming into the terminal phase now, and I think I've got a target lock, or very close to it. And so now we just need to get a little bit closer so we're not popping up too early. That's one of the things I'm learning, is to time that properly. And once we're close enough, trade airspeed for altitude. Just try to get a little bit higher up so we're not, we have a little bit better angle on the target. But don't want to get too slow. We don't want to get too wild here. See if we can get our circles lined up. Maybe that was a little early on the pop-up. Circles lined up. And once again, we get some results. Maybe not quite as good as the last one, but not too bad. And then we're going down and away and get out of town. Okay, so I like the approach a little bit better. I think I popped maybe a little bit too early. I was not quite as all over the place at the end there. I felt a little bit more comfortable acquiring the target back out over the ridge. So I feel like I'm learning a little bit, getting a little bit more proficient. And that's the name of the game when we're working on the range, is just, again, to try and do a lot of things consistently so that we can experiment with ways of making it better. So same thing, we're headed back out to the our initial point back at that ridge, and we're just going to try and fly as close to the ground as we can as we're doing that. That's good practice as well. And I know there are lots of different opinions out there about how to use the various autopilot modes and the flight director in the KA-50, and I've watched a bunch of videos and trying to figure out just what works for me with my control setup and with my, I'm not a rotorcraft kind of guy. Come from, mostly flying fixed-wing aircraft in DCS, so it's really a question of trying to figure out what makes sense to me. It's a better low-level pass here. I think this is more the altitude we want to be at. So going around the trees here. And so for anybody who hasn't tried flying rotorcraft, it is a very different, it's at this point where things get very different, because it's the collective is a power setting in one sense, but it's different in another, because it also controls your altitude, not just the amount of power that's going to the rotor. So when you're flying like this, it's always a question of, do you change altitude with your cyclic, or do you change altitude with your collective? And again, there's watch some videos out there that try to do a good job of explaining that, but a lot of it is just kind of experiential, I think. Certainly open to more thoughts on whether I could be doing this better. I do want to get better at flying this aircraft. It's a lot of fun, but it's always better to be proficient. And now I'm also realizing that one of the things I was talking about, I have lost my situational awareness a little bit. Flown a slightly different route back to the ridge. I'm farther to the left than I wanted to be, because I was kind of following the ground and not looking at my map. So we're going to come at our initial point from the... I have to turn to the right this time, and I'm a little bit higher over this ridge. I wanted to come at the ridge from the other side, so I was coming in behind it. So this isn't great from a tactical perspective, but there's a learning moment for you there. But as before, as we're getting back to the ridge now, the job is to do a fairly smooth deceleration without gaining a lot of altitude, and then also swing back towards the target after having killed off a lot of the speed, so we can pick up the target and then start the tactical run in. So we're at least going to try and do that again. This time we're turning to the right instead of the left, but that as it may. Now I just need to find my target area off in the distance there. Okay. Get the aircraft stabilized. Get the weapons on. What's there? Once we get ourselves something like stable. Get the weapons on, get the Cheval on the screen, and go looking for targets. Where are we? That looks like the third target, which is another set of containers. And I just want to get these targets stabilized right in front of the target and try and acquire it, and we get a little closer. Just don't think there's enough contrast at this distance. I don't want to keep messing with it. So it's a little bit off to the left. Let's get lined up on it and start our run. So this time I've actually switched to the S8s. So we're using 80mm rockets, so it's definitely kind of a spray and pray kind of thing this time, more than the S13s. I'm just learning how these rockets work on the KA-50. Well, obviously we've been doing a bit of work on my channel. If you follow the channel, we've been talking a fair bit about rockets lately. So this is a slightly interesting experience using the Russian rockets and using them from a helicopter. I think maybe there's a video coming on, I know I'm going to do a video on Russian rockets, but certainly their employment from helicopters I'm finding is there's enough different about that at some point I think I want to say something about it, but to be honest with you, I'm going to have to get a lot better at it before I want to say very much authoritative about it. So I'm going to keep coming out to the range and keep practicing. Alright, so let's try and get down a little bit more. I just want to keep the sensor where I can just barely see the target over the trees. And that tree that's coming in from the left, we might need to do something about that. Yep, we're going to need to do something about that. Before we lose the target entirely. I don't want to be too dramatic, but I just want to get out from behind the tree. Alright, stay low, stay on the target. Just keep closing the range here. And here we go. Trade that speed for some altitude. Try and get a little bit better aspect on the target. Nose back over before we lose too much speed. And there's the target. We just need to let the reticle come up to it. Try and stay a little quieter on the stick here and on the rudder pedals. Alright. Well, we got lots of rockets, so that wasn't a very good shot. Let's see if we can get it better centered. A bit better. And some of those are getting close anyways. Alright, and we'll just go down and away. So, yeah, that was a little bit of spray and pray. But some results that weren't too bad. So, one of my biggest problems is I just got to get better at the rudder pedals. I'm having some trouble finding out what the center point of my rudder pedals are, and not very smooth on those. Obviously, don't use them enough in fixed wing land. Anyways, lots to learn, and I'm looking forward to learning it. I'm hoping you guys didn't mind joining me for a little learning session. So a new version of the bombing range will be available that will have those helicopter targets on it if anybody's interested. Thanks again for watching. Make sure that you like and subscribe to the videos if you are enjoying them. And for now, this is going to be Sidekick, signing off.